How does the US solve a problem like Julian Assange? That's what I've been thinking about. I've spoken about it elsewhere already this week. His story is back in the spotlight, which is frankly where it belongs. The spotlight should never leave him, really. And his plight, the plight of Julian Assange, it brings to mind for me the thought of the image of the defeated gladiator in the Colosseum. There he lies in the dust at the mercy of the victor standing over him. But the crowd, or at least enough of the crowd to raise a roar, have their hands up, thumbs up raised, asking that he might yet live to fight another day. The challenge for the emperor, looking on, is what to do next. Does he give that portion of the crowd what they want and spare the life of the vanquished man? Or does he, the emperor, give in to his baser instincts and signal the coup de grace? I would say that's where the US, the United States of America, is now in the case of Australian journalist Julian Assange. It's been years of attritional warfare waged against one man who embarrassed the US government by publishing information that government wanted kept secret. That's it. That's what he did. No one was hurt by the WikiLeaks leaks, or at least the US government, when prompted multiple times, has never been able to come up with any harm done. It's just that he did something they didn't want done, and they want blood. The information that Assange published was truthful, but just information of a sort the US government would have preferred no one knew about. All sorts of things they had done and didn't want to face up to. Assange sought and received asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London in 2012. A dozen years ago now. And then he lost that protection in 2019 after court action. And he's been held in the grim circumstances of His Majesty's Prison Belmarsh in London ever since, fighting via his legal team US efforts to extradite him to trial in the US for the crime of, things alleged against him, or that he hacked or was party to the hacking of encrypted machinery. Who knows? By all accounts, his family, he's got a wife and kids, also psychological evaluations, people that have visited him and what have you, have testified, have said and reported that he's a broken man already, understandably broken, physically and emotionally, given years he was for years in a one-bedroom flat inside the Ecuadorian embassy with no access to outside space. And then, since then, incarceration in the hellhole of Belmarsh, where they keep terrorists and people suspected of all sorts of violent crime. But now, this week, a crucial decision is being made about his future. What it boils down to is either he is given leave to continue to fight extradition, or he's handed over to the US and put on a plane. Now, if given leave to appeal to the European court, because Britain, despite Brexit, is still subject to the thinking and the judgment of the European Court, human rights, but if he's given leave to appeal to that court, then he might be allowed out of prison. Hypothetically, could be given house arrest, let's say, in the UK, so that he could be at least with his wife and children and away from Belmarsh. But, come on, the British court will surely do what it's told by the US state. Our judiciary, like the rest of the British establishment, being lapdogs of the US government. It boils down to whether the US government gives in to its apparent vengeful and vindictive nature, the same nature that has seen it pursue relentlessly and aggressively a journalist who did the job of an investigative journalist and told the people, us, the truth? Or does the US state decide to fake some interest in public opinion and so be seen to do the right thing? You put their prey on a longer leash and let him spend some time with loved ones while his agony of uncertainty is drawn out like a blade drawn from a sheath. I ask you to look at the context. US citizen Gonzalo Lira died in a Ukrainian jail, and the US said nothing, made no protest. More recently, Russian citizen Alexei Navalny died in a Russian jail, and immediately, barely pausing to take a breath, the US was shaking with confected outrage at his passing. President Joe Biden quickly blamed Vladimir Putin and, I quote, his thugs. Biden said even while he had been in prison, Navalny had been an important voice of truth. Oh, the irony. With Lira, a citizen journalist, dead in jail, and while Assange rots in Belmarsh at his command, he laments only the death of his enemy's enemy. Even so, in these mad times, it might be embarrassing, even for an entity as blatantly and evidently brass-necked as the US government, to be seen to complete the destruction of an Australian citizen held on its behalf by a supine British government, another whipped dog licking the hand of the US master.
In just 2 weeks, I lost 36 pounds. I have more energy, better mood. I feel attractive.
It might be embarrassing if the British establishment had so much as a scintilla of shame, which it does not. But brass-necked or not, it is, notionally at least, a presidential election year in the US this year, 2024, when the rest of America's citizens might be indulged with the pantomime of seeming to partake of the democratic process. It's also an election year all round the European Union, with so-called populist parties, better known in the mainstream media as right-wing extremist parties, all of them on the rise in the better part of, I think it's nearly 20 member states. With all that going on, you have to ask, does the brass-necked US state pull the metaphorical trigger on Julian Assange, further exposing its understanding of itself as being all-powerful and answerable to no one, far less to the proles? So what path will they take? What face will they present to the people they hold in such withering contempt, which is to say, their own people and the people of the wider world? And I would say it hardly matters. Any pretense at treating Julian Assange with humanity will be just that. It will be pretense. There'll be no heart in it, no sincerity, no truth. The truth of it all about the state of so-called democracy, replaced in every way that matters with something between totalitarian dictatorship and military rule, dominated for American citizens directly, and for the rest of us in the West indirectly, by the demands and wants and intentions of the US state intelligence military industrial complex. About the all but complete erosion of meaningful freedom of speech, about the replacement of the will of the people by the entrenched sanctity of the institutions of the state. The truth of it all is that whatever happens to Julian Assange next, however the US decides to solve that problem, is that our self-appointed emperors are a distance measurable in terms of the thickness of a cigarette paper away from once and for all assuming the power of life and death over not just one Australian journalist, but over all of us. How much they reveal about that reality in whatever they tell the British court to do with Julian Assange, how much they rub our noses in that reality, will not alter one jot the truth of that reality. I say the countries into which we were born no longer exist. I say Britain is still there as a fact of geography, of course, and so too the USA, but those places, those dreamscapes of equality before the law, of habeas corpus, of freedom, all freedom, not just freedom of speech, places where governments are only the servants of the people, only the manifestations of the will of the people as empowered by meaningful elections. I say those places are gone now, as is made plain by the unimpeded flood of illegal immigrants into the US, into Britain, into the whole of the West. In fact, to describe that flow as unimpeded is insufficient, since it's a flow that is actively being pushed by those same nefarious states and their agents. As is made plain by what might reasonably be described as invasions, as the opening moves in the replacement of indigenous populations with outsiders loyal to elsewhere. Our emperors have opened the gates and look forward to ruling over places made altogether and irrevocably different than before. And I couldn't say for sure when it happened, this dissolution of the places we used to know and which we understood as our own inheritance, fought for and handed down to us by our ancestors. And it might not be absolutely complete. But enough has happened for it to be fair to say we live now in places that are, in every meaningful sense, the creation of those determined to shape the world in their own image. Julian Assange is, among much else, an individual symbol of where we are now. He published the truth and paid the price. And to make sure there are no more people behaving like Julian Assange, the powers that be conjured into being the notion that information might be true, but simultaneously unwelcome, inconvenient, and so not to be tolerated, forbidden, under pain of utter destruction of those revealing it. And by such means, by blatant censorship, by destruction of free speech, such as we have known and taken for granted, by such perversion of truth itself, we are being told by the new emperors that we are, unless we do and say precisely what we are told, we are, every one of us, Julian Assange.